How's it going, Goodman Games fans? My name is Matt, and welcome to another episode of Raw Rules is Written. As always, I'm joined by my outstanding co-host.
Hey, I'm Stefan, known as DM Bad Wrong Fun on a couple sites out there, and we have our favorite guest, best friend of the show.
Stefan, I'm gonna just have to recycle the old names, just because I think I've run out.
You
The
did a
regulator
good
of
job.
rules, the master of mitigation, the Julius Caesar of adjudication. I came up with some good ones, right, Bob?
Yeah.
But Bob Brinkman, welcome to the show.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me back.
Bob, if this is the first time someone is tuning in, Rules is Written is all about a show about talking about the rules for products that Goodman Games produces, Dungeon Crawl Classics, Mutant Crawl Classics, Dying Earth. We might dive into a little weird frontiers, a little third-party stuff down the road. But Bob, would you please tell us who you are in this world?
Sure. My name's Bob Brinkman. I'm a writer for Goodman Games. I've worked on Mutant Crawl Classics. I've worked on Original Adventures Reincarnated, including Castle Amber, Dark Tower, and the upcoming Caverns of Thracia. I've written a number of adventures for like Weird Frontiers. I did the Malevolent Seven. I also co-host the Sanctum Secorum podcast, and that's my cat Vance.
Very nice. Well, we've got a lot of questions to go through because we love to have Bob on the show to kind of recap the past 3 episodes. And Stefan, back in February 20th, a long time ago, we had Andy Edmonds on the show. And Andy, we started talking about spells, Bob. We started talking about spell episodes. I busted out a little science on this one. But the first question from that episode is, do the effects of multiple clouds summoned by Choking Cloud stack on top of each other? Like if Stefan casts a Choking Cloud that does 1 point of damage, and I cast a Choking Cloud that does 1 point of damage, does the cloud get thicker if we combine them?
No, it does not. And actually, I want to point out, since you brought out some science, while your friend that is the scientist was certainly right in Avogadro's law, you gave him the wrong information because Avogadro's law doesn't apply. For 2 reasons. Okay. One, it's a game and not a simulation.
I never claimed to be a scientist.
But also, Choking Cloud is not a gas. Hydrogen is a gas. Oxygen is a gas. Choking Cloud is a mist. A mist does not obey Avogadro's law. So we'll just take that right out of the equation, even though it supports my answer, which is no, they don't stack.
All right.
And I think part of your reasoning was, well, it doesn't say it doesn't. But if it could stack, it would be very helpful if they actually gave you information on the effects of stacking, right? Because this is something that does something very set and done. As a house rule, what I do in case of like multiple castings is I let the strongest be in effect, but they do not stack.
Okay.
In the
I'll say in the YouTube, I'll just want to point out in the YouTube comments, and we kept on saying gas, so maybe it's off there. But yeah, we had some people on the Twitch episode and then later YouTube upload going like, oh yeah, when I was in the Marines, yeah.
Your listener that brought up like pepper spray was right. So pepper spray, if this was a simulation as opposed to rules as written, that listener was correct because it's a mist, and fogs and mists can certainly become more dense without an increase in pressure. So when they said, well, it should be able to get stronger because pepper spray does, they were correct in a real world environment.
But rules as written, we're not doing it.
If it is a mist, then why can't it be more concentrated? Why can't it become more concentrated?
Because this is not a simulation. This is rules as written, Matt. Now, if you would like to house rule it that way, your table, you're more than welcome to, but that is not rules as written.
Okay. Well, this might come into play in a later question where we talk about Spellburn to cast spells.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm ready for
that. Because I also don't know if that is in the book as well. But Stefan, what was our second question? Do you have it up and ready?
I do, yeah. The second question was about Ekam's mystical mask. Does the instill fear effect from it require an action? And
And if I
yeah,
recall, your concern
viewers, it can
was
do a whole
no.
lot of, yeah. I believe so. Yeah, we were just like, because level, it only lasts for what, rounds per caster level. So if you're level 1 and you get that effect, you've already taken your action, right? And it's only lasting that one round, then you don't even have an opportunity to do it. So I mean, from that basic level, it didn't make sense to me at least.
Well, I mean, for an effect that lasts one round, that is combat oriented, I would say that you haven't, including your next action, right? Your action's ended,
Okay.
you've cast it. So I would give you the 1. And it's actually a really good question, because there is part of the text, I think, lends itself to confusion when they talk about you can only target one person. That does seem action-like, right? I mean, that's probably why the question came up. But that's there, from what I can tell, to sort of limit the use of that effect, so it's not more powerful than Scare, which is a second level spell, right?
Right.
So no, it doesn't take an action, but you can only hit one person with it per round, and yeah, you're just kind of glancing over, catching their eye. It doesn't take an action.
And so does it encompass that they have to see you, Bob, or would the casting, if you target that person, is that person kind of like magically drawn to look at you?
I would say they're magically drawn to look at you. However, I would say in the midst of combat, unless someone is actively avoiding looking at you and quite possibly suffering combat penalties since they are avoiding looking in your general direction where your elf buddy has got a longbow, you can catch their eye. It's really pretty simple. You can make a loud noise and someone will at least glance over real quick to see what's going on.
Because I mean, not so much from the judge's perspective, where we want our monsters to try to be able to maneuver the players, but if we had an evil wizard who had cast Ekam's mystical mask, and Stefan was affected the first time, and me and you were like, "Oh, don't look at his face! Don't look at his face!" Would
Well,
he be able to target us that next round?
I would say if you are actively avoiding, looking at him, certainly he wouldn't be able to affect you, but it would impact what you would be able to.
Well, and I'd just bring up, I think, an also pretty common thing is like, what if it's a creature that doesn't have eyeballs? What if it's a creature with blind sense?
If it doesn't have sight, then
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what you look like.
Yeah, so
true.
it definitely has to see it. I think we did talk about that in the spell.
That's just sort of like color spray doesn't affect things without eyes.
Yep. All right. Well, our third question, Bob, was do the effects of Enlarge take place immediately upon casting? And I think Stefan and I both have always ruled that it does take place immediately because, the players want their guy to be huge during the turn that casting is going on. But I think Stefan didn't, after we talked about this, didn't we discover that it takes like an entire round to cast and
Yeah, it
it
says
would actually
casting
be the
time
next
one
round?
round. So we're like, yeah, doesn't that take it up, or is this one of those things where you say one round so that it kind of limits usage with when you got multiple action dice? But it made us both ask ourselves that question for sure.
Well,
Well,
and
in the event of like worst case scenario, Bob, where you go before I do, and then I cast Enlarge on you, that next round comes and you have an action. What's your ruling on that?
so, well, it depends on how strict you want to be, right? Certainly, it does not take place in the round you cast it. I think we're all in agreement there. You cast it, takes a full round. It's when it happens in the next round. And I mean, if you want to get like really, really old school, OD&D, first ed, where it's like, okay, well, I started casting this on this segment, so it goes off on this segment. Certainly you can. In my opinion, it goes off the next round, right? I mean, because you're not trying, the caster isn't trying to directly attack someone, so initiative really doesn't matter. He can just start casting as far as I'm concerned. because rules is written, that's kind of a hair splitting point, right? There's nothing in the rules that specifically states, so on your next initiative something happens, but it's kind of implied. But DCC, we try to avoid hyper crunch, so I would just say let it go to the next round.
Yeah. I think we also discussed, wait, is he doing it at initiative 14, and it's going to happen at initiative 14 and after on the next round, or is he really doing it the whole round? He just, this is how we take turns and how we represent that.
Yeah, because if you think about it, with casting a spell, right? Okay, so my initiative is 12, and I cast Magic Missile. Well, that doesn't mean in like the 0.3 of a second that is an initiative point, I cast the entire spell. That's when I release the spell, right? So
you're casting the other rounds that people are doing stuff, and then when it gets to your point, it's released in that 10-second time period.
Sure. So,
well, Stefan, what was our fourth question?
Another enlarge based one. We're going, how do you adjudicate a target becoming enlarged within an enclosed space? Are they breaking the thing? Are they getting hurt? Clearly there's going to be a lot of are you in a paper house? Are you in a glass house? Are you in an iron cage?
I absolutely love that question. I love the discussion. Rules is written, there is no answer, right? There's absolutely no answer. So you had some great ideas. There's a third floor above them, so they smash up through the ceiling. You could do all sorts of things. That is literally just whatever the judge wants to do and how cruel you want to be. Now, I would say that if you're in a dwarven mine and someone hits you with, max enlarge, you might be extruded like toothpaste. And I don't think we would need to roll for damage at that point. You would just be dead. But in a case like that, right, where someone might be trying to do it to their enemy for that exact purpose, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the big bad. Okay, well, I don't have any combat spells left. I'm going to Spellburn for max enlarge.
That's a great idea.
In a case like that, while enlarge normally doesn't allow for a saving throw because you're normally enlarging your ally, right? There's no save for lay on hands either. I would at least give a saving throw versus being insta-killed by extrusion. But that's just it.
That is a great idea. I didn't even think of it using it offensively, Stefan, to make the big guy even. It's a great idea.
He's the first person I ever knew that used Featherfall offensively. So
I've tried to use it offensively, but yeah, I haven't found a way yet.
When there's that long fall and they're drifting down, there's plenty of time to do things like pepper them with arrows or drop large rocks on them.
It's true. Got my mind thinking about what reverse Featherfall would be like. Are they going to slowly float up?
Don't drop. Well, our fifth and final question for Andy was, can an action be taken to save an ally after Featherfall has been cast upon them? And I think we kind of gave a situation with that one, Bob, where I'm falling off of a bridge or something like that, and Stefan instantly casts his Featherfall. And so the fall isn't, it's kind of slowed a little bit. But it's more kind of like a gentle floating. When you get to the bottom, it's more about the damage you receive when you get to the bottom and not how fast you're falling.
That kind of depends, right? I mean, after the first or second successful level, it really does get into how fast you're falling. I don't know.
Yeah, then you do float down.
I mean, you pulled out like chemistry, so I guess I'll get mathy out of you for just a second. So so if you're hit with a fall with Featherfall and it gives you the falling rate of 50 feet per round, right? So you're falling at about 6 miles an hour, which is enough to really screw somebody up anyway, but we'll ignore that. So they're not really slowly drifting. To put it into perspective, for each initiative count, right? 20, 19, 18, 17, they're falling 2.5 feet for every initiative count. So no, you're not going to be able to reach out and grab them. An initiative count is 0.3 of a second. And
not reach out and grab them, but like toss a rope. Like, would we have like Featherfall is instantaneous, right?
Yep.
Stefan sees me falling, he instantly cast it. Boom! It happens that fast. Are the rest of us quick enough to grab a rope from my pack and toss it, or take another
Or
spell
I would
action?
say,
slash, how much do we allow the wizard to feel like having Featherfall was worth it?
well, I think having Featherfall is always worth it, right? Because not being dead is worth it.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and also, I would say that it would depend on first of all on your rope, right? I mean, if you've got 100 feet of rope as opposed to 50, and you hit someone with Featherfall, you can certainly throw a rope to them the next round, and they can catch it, and you can bring them up because that's going to fall faster than they are. That's not an issue. Beyond that, though, not really. You could, if you wanted to see how far someone's fallen, it'd be the next round, right? I mean, a round is 6 seconds, guys. And
10 seconds.
is it 10? I thought it was 6.
Yeah, you're thinking of old school D&D, Bob.
Yeah.
If it's 10 seconds, well, then they're probably only falling about 3 miles an hour. My answer's still going to stand, though. No, you really can't grab them in time. You could, like I said, if you've got a rope that's long enough, certainly. Now, what's really kind of funny is if you are just free falling, and because you use an example, a 1,000-foot drop, right?
Yep.
If someone's falling
Right.
1,000 feet, technically it will take them more than a round to hit the bottom.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's always that as well, right? If you've got a flying familiar, get it down close. If you've got a focal familiar, get it all the way down there and hit them with Featherfall then. But yeah, no. Other than that, human reflexes just aren't fast enough. By the time you're rolling initiative to start a fresh round, he's already fallen 50 feet.
Hey, there you have it, everybody. All right, well, now we're going to go into the episode where we had Julian Burnick on the show. Unfortunately, this episode may be lost to the annals of time, and I don't know what Julian said on this. I asked for an email reference on what he might remember. But, Stefan, what was our first question for Julian?
Our first one was, does the 10 points of Spellburn required to cast Find Familiarity add to the result of the casting?
And if I'm not mistaken, Julian agreed that it did, didn't he?
He did. Yes, he said it did. I said it didn't. You said it did.
Yeah, Julian.
And Julian was wrong. All right,
All right,
good. I'm
Bob.
glad the sass from Julian's episode can carry over into this one.
What do you think?
So it doesn't. Now, Matt, I know that you will certainly bring up in the rule book. It says before rolling any spell check, a wizard may declare he'll attempt Spellburn, and that expends points to enhance the spell check. And that's pretty much where you're coming from, right?
I have new evidence, but yeah, that during that episode, I believe that was where I was coming from.
So further down, it says some spells and magical items require Spellburn to function, as noted in their descriptions. You'll note that the first passage I read you doesn't say all Spellburn does is this, because that's not true. If you look at the patron Spellburn information in the patron section of the book, it even says when Spellburn occurs, it is not just a mechanical game term, but a transaction between mortal and immortal, because we're talking about patron Spellburn there. But it is not just a mechanical thing where for every point you gain a point. There are other uses for it. If I recall, there's at least one third-party adventure where a point of Spellburn is required to open a door. So Spellburn isn't always about just boosting your spell. Now, beyond that,
Rules is written it is, Bob. Rules is written it is.
Some spells and magical items require Spellburn to function. A wizard may declare. It is not rules is written that way. Further, let's talk about those 10 points for Find Familiar. Because if you say those 10 points of Spellburn are added to the Find Familiar check, that means that Find Familiar for an average wizard at first level will only fail on a 1. And if the wizard has an intelligence of 4, which is the minimum to be able to cast spells at all, it will fail on a 1 through 3. And you can reduce that to 1 with minor corruption. So either the spell only ever fails 5% of the time, or Spellburn does not, those 10 points do not get added in. You can add other Spellburn. It's a ritual casting. You can extend the casting time and boost it without burning more stats. Further, if your wizard has already done something like Patron Bonded to Babugbabills, a spell burn result of 2 on the Babugbabills chart allows them to burn up to 10 points without taking damage, so long as they make the appropriate sacrifice in the next day. So essentially, either those 10 points do not get added to the spell check, or you might as well not roll a die at all. But yes, it does not.
I'm gonna have to look up Patron Spellburn here, Bob. But
page 322.
322. Let me investigate this. Stefan, what do you think
printing,
about what Bob is saying?
I think Bob is right. That's been my longstanding opinion in general. And that's why I'm the better host here.
I'm happy to prove you guys wrong.
No,
Elena, if you could bring up special handout Z, please. On page 48 in the wizard description, it says to invoke a patron, because that's Bob's specific questions, and I can't believe we just found this now, that I just realized it was there. Wizard must spellburn at least 1 point of ability score. See page 107. It directs us to spellburning on page 107.
Because that is where in the rule book it tells you
that is correct.
All about spellburn.
Including the sentence, some spells and magical items require spellburn to function, as noted in their descriptions, which is what you just read. The description
on page 107.
That's on page 107. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Noted in their description. So thank you, Matt. You backed up what I just said.
Let's see. Let's see. Okay. So 106. We have. I mean, I don't have that one in my handout, but Elena, if you could bring up page 106, please. And that says blood aids great sorcery. Oh, not page 106, but handout ZZ. Blood aids great sorcery. The magic user can harness magical energies if they are willing to make a mortal sacrifice, etc., etc. May declare that they will attempt spellburn in attempting. Yeah,
I literally read that portion as part of the discussion here, Matt. Yes,
I agree.
Declare before you roll, you may declare that, but that is something that is optional, Matt. That is,
and not according to Invoke Patron, Bob. Not according to Invoke Patron. It says I have to.
Matt, do you want to be right?
Page 107.
Matt, 2 different paragraphs. Cool your jets. First paragraph talks about boosting a spell result by opting to spellburn. The second says spells and magical items may require. If it requires it to function, you are not opting to do that. You have to cast it. It is part of the structural mechanic of the spell. That is wholly separate. You may spellburn on top of the required spellburn, like with Chill Touch, right? Chill Touch requires you to spellburn a point. You don't get that point. But if you spellburn 5 points, you're going to get a +4.
Right. So on page 48, it says the wizard must spellburn at least 1 point. See page 107. Is that sentence directing us to the spellburn rules on page 107?
Yes. And so your handout ZZ is one of the 5 paragraphs there. The 4th paragraph is that very short one sentence that Bob and now I as well have been repeating.
You're trying to ignore that, but you really can't.
I'm not. I don't have that page up, but let me bring it up real quick.
Paragraph 3.
I'm definitely not trying to ignore it. So where do we say? Some spells and magical items require spellburn to function, as noted in their description. So you would say Invoke Patron is one of those spells.
Yes, it requires.
And
please note
it
that
directs us on how to use spellburn on page 107.
It takes us back to this very section where on page 107 it says some spells require.
Correct.
So that is what it is taking you to, as well as just the explanation of spellburn in general, because it's the first time you're going to come across that in the book. You might want to know what it is.
Matt, I'm starting to think you have one of those like learning disabilities where you can't listen to things, you have to read something to be able to
I
absorb
mean,
it.
I
No.
appreciate.
Matt does
I
You
mean,
not.
know.
Matt
that's
does
kind
not
of
have a
that's not
learning
very cool to
disability.
say.
Matt
Uh,
is merely the audience proxy for people that are confused.
All right.
if Matt could
Just making
speak,
sure.
but when Matt tries to say his
You-
point, Bob and Stefan talk over me, and then I'm told to cool my jets.
Well, because
So
you're
if
wrong.
Matt could get his point out, because he's letting everyone else get their points out, and not be admonished, because people with learning disabilities have learning disabilities,
yeah.
and I may or may
That's why we're
not.
still
Who
here.
knows?
Who knows?
To
So now
invoke a
that you've settled
patron,
that, would you
the
like me
wizard must spellburn. It says go to page 107.
to?
The directions on how to spellburn are 1 point is used and 1 point is gained.
No.
So how do we
Before
take
rolling
apart?
any spell check, a wizard may declare he will attempt spellburn. That is one thing. Some spells and magic items require spellburn. It's a separate thing. They're both on page 107, Matt. This is
So how do
rules
we
as
spellburn?
written. You can't
Explain
answer.
how we spellburn to me.
You
Explain spellburn. I've never done it before. How do I do it?
you burn a point of physical attributes through any number
Okay.
of ways.
Okay. And
If
then
you
what
would
happens?
if you would like to add it to a spell, you can add it at 1 point for 1 point. However,
That's
some
not what it
things
says. It
require.
doesn't say if you'd like to add it. It
Yes,
says for
may.
every
It
ability
says no,
point
no, 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 no,
he
no.
expends, the
Before
wizard
rolling, and
adds
Matt,
one to
are you
their spell
ignoring
check.
the first sentence, Matt? Seriously? Seriously? Before rolling any spell check, a wizard may declare. It is an optional thing because you don't have to. If you have to spellburn to cast a spell, you are not boosting your spell. That is a requirement of the spell. Spellburn can be used for multiple things, has been used for multiple things in adventures. Rules is written. It does not get added, Matt. You can house rule it if you want, and that's not a problem. But again, find familiar, then don't roll.
Let me ask you this. When it says in attempting to spellburn, if we're taking each word at its face value, that says attempting. How do we fail at spellburn?
Patron spellburn
Yep.
can get complicated.
No.
Patron spellburn
Yeah,
can negate.
that's on a different page.
No.
Different
And
page.
that is still, Matt, you dig all around the book to justify your answers. You can't say something's on another page and disregard it.
I'm just asking you to explain.
Patron spellburn can fail, Matt. So yes, in attempting to spellburn.
And you don't think that sentence is talking about regular spellburn. You think it's talking about special spellburn.
It is covering everything.
Oh.
Because if you've got a patron, Matt, if you've got a patron, that is what you do for spellburn.
Well, I mean, isn't that just your interpretation of the words?
No,
you're saying it's covering all spellburn.
It's rules as written, Matt. It is rules as written. I don't know how I could make it any clearer.
Not sure, Bob. I'm still.
You're just gonna have to agree to disagree then.
I mean, I've got
free to disagree and run your house rule at your table however you would like.
We've got Julian Burnick that agrees with me. We got Daniel Bishop that agrees with me.
Harley Stroh don't.
You know.
Yeah. Yes. Harley, who was there when the game was written, does not agree.
Well, we're gonna have Harley on another episode, and with this new evidence, since we've talked to him the first time, maybe he'll change his answer. Anyway, Stefan, let's get to what the next question is. We've spent way too much time on this one, but it was an engaging discussion as always. Thank you very much. What was our next question?
If this is more of a less a rules as written thing, but our next one was how to find familiar casting time of 1 week be adjudicated for a one-shot versus a campaign.
So
how do you handle that in your games, Bob?
For a one shot, I don't allow it. Either I've given the wizard a familiar at CareGen, or I haven't. We're starting the adventure where we start the adventure. We're not starting the adventure and letting you take a week or more to ritually cast. I think it's important for judges to take that into consideration, though, when they're looking at those pre-gens that they're about to hand out. Does this character has this wizard has Patron Bond? Does he have a patron? Has Find Familiar? Does he have a familiar? I tend to make sure that they have a familiar, but not always. But if it's not on the sheet at the beginning of convention play, I'm not going to eat into the time of everyone at the table to handle that. We're good to go. I think you'll be fine. Go for it.
All right. So our next one is does the wizard class automatically receive a familiar, Bob?
No, there's a spell for that.
There is a spell for that. Well, I meant like as an ability of their class description.
Yeah, his wording there was poor, but the wizards they've got familiar is like listed in their class abilities, like luck and languages and action dice, and it says more than one wizard has found comfort in yada yada examples. A wizard may utilize the spell Find Familiar to obtain such a partner. So it says that for them in their class abilities, but not elves. It's odd. And
we were talking about the wizard automatically saying, "Hey, I want to choose Find Familiar as a spell, and be able to have a familiar."
Now that's a very different question. While technically it's not rules as written, I would let that fly at my table. I would certainly let that fly at my table if someone wanted to do that. I wouldn't, if someone says, I want, I want to automatically take Magic Missile, I would say, no, you're going to have to, get what you get. But if they wanted to do Find Familiar, which is a useful spell, but it can be more useful if you wait to cast it until you're higher level, right, and get those higher results. I'd allow that as a house rule. I would do that. No, that's a cool idea, Matt. I like that.
Well, and we brought it up that that each class in their class description they have all these abilities that directly relate to their class. They can all have those. The only one that has an ability in the class description that's not considered an ability is the wizard with Find Familiar.
Yeah, that is,
and so that's kind of odd.
No, that does kind of stand out. Yeah, no, you're totally right. That stands out as odd. I would certainly allow it, right? I mean, it would be a house rule, but I mean, elves all get to start with Patron Bond and Invoke Patron, right? So I would.
Yeah, I think we brought that up. It's like
a wizard to. I wouldn't give it to them as a bonus spell, but if they wanted to choose that as one of their party spells, I'd give it to them.
Yeah, and I think we brought it. It is kind of like a mirror to the Patron Bond thing, and that buffs your wizard a little bit. That extra HP.
Yeah.
Sometimes people complain about elves just being better wizards.
They do.
So it kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense having that, and having it as an option because you look at Appendix N. Most of our wizards are bad guys in Appendix N. But some have familiars, some don't. It's a tradition that not all wizards or witches follow.
Yeah, no, that is Matt, was that your idea initially if a wizard wanted to swap that out?
Most of these are my ideas, Bob, so we can talk about things that come up with the spell.
Matt, I will tell you right now, I think that's brilliant, and I'm going to adopt that as a house rule at my table. Because I
appreciate that.
All right, you've redeemed yourself, Matt.
At least I've gotten something right this episode.
Oh, you've gotten a lot of stuff. You've got one thing.
Evan, the next question wasn't really a mechanical question.
We went through creating a familiar. Yeah, how do you create a familiar is what we went through. And we rolled on the tables. Made a spell check.
Do you do anything special when you roll a create a familiar with a player right there?
Sometimes it kind of depends on circumstances, right? It's funny. One of the projects I've been working on, I just statted up for variant familiars, right? So if for example they already have a patron, right, and now they're getting a familiar, well then certainly that familiar might draw upon the power of their patron, and so might have an additional cool ability or things of that nature. And of course, I mean, let's face it. Find familiar. All of the results are, judge discretion, right? So I think we all agree the higher you roll, the better your spell result should be. There's just no hard and fast rules for how cool a familiar should be at a 30 versus a 14.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a 30 for lawful is different than for neutral and chaotic. So it's like it's not really ranked in the same way most spells are
unless
ranked.
you want a guardian familiar. I think that's 14 to 17 on everybody.
Yeah, or 12 to 17. 12. Yeah, guardians are the low totem pole,
but they help you in combat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the Guardian Familiar is like one of the. I mean, I think, in my opinion, the Guardian Familiar is better than the Focal Familiar. That you're just going to cast a spell through. I like the Guardian Familiar.
Yeah. Oh no,
kind of wizard you want to be. But yeah, I'll say yeah. Some people they might they randomly roll and they're like, I got a giant ant. I've got +1 to ESP and telepathy and scrying. I don't got any spells like that. I guess go quest for them. Is what you tell them.
All right. Well, our next episode, Bob, we had special guest, first-time guest on the show, Steve Bean, who has written a bunch of DCC stuff and all kinds of things in our Goodman Games realm. So it was very exciting to have him on the show. And our first episode for Steve was, can Magic Missile be cast at an unseen target through the familiar? So the wizard can't see it, but the familiar is around the corner, or maybe flying down like a bat, like you said. Is that possible?
You got to the familiar to see through the familiar's eyes.
So first of all, you have to have a focal familiar, because that's how you can see through their eyes to begin with, right? Because otherwise they can talk to you, but you can't see it. And second, then you would cast through the familiar, which not only allows you to do that, but also comes to the +1 for your spell check. So yes, if the familiar can see it, you can hit it. You just have to cast through the familiar.
Well, and the focal familiar, what we talked about there for a while is I'm looking at the thing. The wizard can cast spells with his familiar as the point of origin rather than himself. This ability lets the familiar deliver spells that normally require the caster to touch their target. So we're going, wait, is that touch attack only?
It's
the familiar?
It's awkwardly phrased, but it's
or
the
do you just
only
have to...
way you can use a touch-based spell without the wizard actually touching them, right? Because it says you must touch them. Well, you don't have to touch the familiar for the familiar to touch someone else. So that's why that's there. But you can cast spells through the familiar. It is because it's the point of origin for the spell.
And now that I bring it up, so yeah, that was the question I kind of had. The wizard can cast spells with their familiar as the point of origin rather than themselves. So with the familiar being the point of origin, does the familiar still, does the wizard still have to have line of sight or magic missile?
Well, the familiar has to have line of sight.
Right.
And specifically, and it gets really weird, right? If you're talking about, well, it can't see it, but it can smell it, hear it, etc. That doesn't matter. It needs
you got
to be able to see it. Well, bats also see things, right? I mean, they're not really blind. But it's that whole line of sight, because the bat, anything could hear someone on the other side of a door, but you can't hit it, right? So you need to be able to see it, or if you wanted to flex a bit, as long as they can, the familiar has an incredibly sharp sense of hearing, and the shot would be unobstructed. You could certainly do that as a house rule, but it has to be seen. That's the thing. So it's unseen by the wizard, but it needs to be seen by the familiar then.
Stefan, what was our second question for Steve?
Our second question on that, we got into force manipulation. Yeah, do the walls of force created by force manipulation protect both the caster and the allies?
And these three...
Yeah, different spell results on force manipulation do a lot of different things. And if you want to, it can feel a little fiddly.
Yes,
I think it is.
Bob, these three questions kind of go together. Do you want to answer them all three or individually? One kind of goes with the other. Can the walls of force be entered and exit freely? Will the walls of force allow allied attacks to carry through? We're talking about, kind of the semantics of the words, and
Yeah,
whether,
we can answer. We can answer them all at once.
if it blocks if it blocks them from coming in, does it also, take away your air? All you have is this much air, etc.
There is actually. Give me a moment. I think.
Well, while you're looking for it, I'm going to tell this
Yeah.
story.
Go ahead.
Stefan, I just ran the Abbot of the Woods.
I know
Were
you
you in?
killed me. Well, yeah. Well, you didn't kill me, but
I mean,
another
we were
player. It
there,
was another
and
player's fault. Look.
MDD wanted to use force manipulation to seal you guys in a form-fitting wall of force, Bob, as they're walking in a straight line. And he's like, I can shape it however I want. And I was like, okay, go ahead. And he's like, I put air holes in it, so we can breathe. And I was like, okay. He must have watched the episode too, Stefan. And then and you can move it at like 10 feet per round. So they were moving it, but it doesn't say you can change the shape of it once it's formed. So they went down the stairs, Bob, and I said, momentum carries you, and the thing starts to sink in the water, and the holes fill up, and you're about to drown. And he's like, no, I changed the shape. And so, we got into a little discussion about it.
It doesn't say you've changed the shape. No, it doesn't, Matt. I'm with you on that. He was being very clever, right? I put air holes in it so we don't suffocate. That's
right.
Clever, right? No, and that is actually one of the rare results where you actually can cast spells through the wall of force when you get all the way up towards the top. But it protects the caster and the allies, even when you've created the smaller results, right? You've got a tower shield. Well, your ally can stand behind that and be protected, right? So yes, right. It can protect the caster and his allies. Doesn't always, depending on the result.
All right. So can those walls of force be entered and exit freely?
No, I'll say for anyone out there who's thinking about putting air holes in their wall of force ball, after this session that I was in, did some Googling, because I was like, how could I Google this and I'll get a real answer. If you're in a coffin, if you're locked in a coffin, you probably have about 5 hours of air. So you probably don't need to put air holes in your wall of force. Probably not. I mean, who knows? They can last for days, but just do some damage, you'll get out quicker.
Might call them air holes. I, as a judge, would call them magic missile entry points.
Could be that, yeah.
So that would certainly negate the protection against magic missiles.
I'm saying air is probably not a concern if this comes up in your game.
Choking cloud. Choking cloud.
Keep it out.
Get in there,
choking cloud, get it. Oh, that'd be awful. That'd be like being on the road trip with that one guy that had too much Taco Bell and all the windows are rolled up. Yeah, no, it'd be bad.
All right, so Bob, we kind of mentioned the holy sanctuary, where or magic shield, where if you create a big enough shield, people can still walk in and out of it. Can those walls of force be entered and exit freely, or are they solid?
No,
Stefan and I talked about them being.
They are. They're like sci-fi force fields, right? I mean, as long as they're there, you're not going through it.
And your attacks.
Your attacks don't go through unless you've rolled high enough that you can cast a spell through it. That's it. You can't attack through them. It's a wall, not, I think, as you put it, not a one-way mirror.
Yeah. So in like the 28 to 29 result, that says like complete protection against all physical attacks, magic missiles, cold, heat, and lightning. So it protects against those. But could I send a sleep through it? Because that's not listed.
That's right. Or a charm person, or Ekam's mystical mask.
The Ekam's mystical mask, I would say it would certainly depend on the result, right? Because the horrible visage, for example, you just have to be able to see them.
Yeah.
So that would you're not casting that spell on them, you're casting that spell on you.
Also, that's the 28 to 29. 30 to 31 adds all spells in the description for like protection. So
because if you look, the spells that it's talking about at 28 and 29 are they're physical things, right? I would also say that like scorching ray, fireball, things of that nature, those are physical things, right? Fire is a very physical thing. Sleep, however, is not. Charmed Person is not. I mean, I guess you could rule that a wall of force blocks off all sound as well, but there's nothing that mentions that. So I would certainly say that non-physical attack spells, just by their nature, could have an effect. Whether you want to argue the semantics of is it being cast through the wall or by its nature it encompasses an area, that's up to you.
I'll say, side note, personal, opinion on this. Can I cast, force manipulation? Say I'm making a wall, but I want the wall flat on the ground so that I can go over the big chasm. That's my floating platform. Can I have a wall that's diagonal so that I have a nice ramp?
Well, it would have to be
something.
anchored. It couldn't float, right?
All right.
Because that's a very different result, and I've had discussions with
You're right. It's solid
the
matter.
Disc result. I've had conversations with Michael Curtis on that one because and by the way, if you want to talk to someone who can give you final absolute answers on anything to do with the spell, Michael Curtis wrote this spell.
All right.
So, but yeah, you can when you get to those levels where you shape it any way you want and things of that nature, and it's 10 foot per caster level and things of that nature. Yeah, as long as it's anchored on something, if you want to make it into a bridge, you certainly can. Just run right across it. You bet.
All right. Well, our last question for Steve Bob was, what is the extent of the mundane ranged attacks that can be affected by the magic shield spell? So it says, blocks, or not blocks, but, the damage is reduced, mundane ranged attacks. Does that include mundane ranged attacks from like Ramgam's pistol, or, like a spit from a lizard?
Yeah, well, we'll cover spit. We'll cover like poison and acidic spit separately in just a moment. If
Okay.
it is a mundane weapon, right? And now I know that that the idea of artifacts are artifacts in MCC, and so they're somehow different. They're really not. They're not magical, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole thing about it. So yeah, it totally affects those as normal. For things like spit and acid, I would say that in the case of like acid, you would do damage reduction as normal, and then the person's got to save, and whatever made it through, makes it through. But with like poisonous spit, I would just say it's blocked. The spit by its very nature doesn't do damage. It has to, you have to somehow be hit with it, right? It's got to get into your bloodstream as opposed to just hit you to do damage.
What about like a giant boulder from like a stone giant?
I
Pretty
think a giant
mundane.
boulder from a stone giant could very well do more than 20 points, which I think is the max reduction you can get. Plus, if you want to have fun, there's two things you can do there. Well, we've covered ourselves with a protective dome. Okay, well, the boulder didn't necessarily damage you, but it has driven the dome down into the ground a little bit, and now you're all on your knees because you don't have space.
I like that.
There's also something else to consider, and I don't know, and this goes beyond rules as written to it's not really discussed. But remember that, like, if a demon, for example, is immune to weapons of +2 or less, right? It'll say, okay, so that creatures with natural attacks of 4 hit dice qualify. So if you really wanted to, creatures that have high hit dice technically strike like a magical weapon for purposes of everything other than this spell. So not rules as written, maybe rules that could be clarified with a conversation with Mike. Come on, you want to get Michael Curtis on this show.
I've asked Michael Curtis, and he's a very busy man.
He is a very busy man.
We haven't been able to nail him down yet.
You don't,
And he
just email
has said, he has said that he likes everyone, making their own interpretations. He, in the spirit of DCC, he doesn't want to give a definitive answer. He wants everyone to enjoy it as they would like to enjoy it.
Well, and that's the key, right? I mean, this show is rules as written. It's not necessarily rules as the only way to play the game properly.
Yeah.
If you're having
And,
fun, I don't care what house rules you're using, but if I'm at your table, please let me know what they are.
and viewers out there, we get passionate, especially when Bob comes on, but that's because we all love the hobby. We all love talking about this stuff, and we love each other. So it's nothing to be worried about.
No,
but Stefan,
Mhm.
go ahead, Bob.
I was gonna, and that's really the thing, right? I mean, that's the beautiful thing about the DCC community is you can ask a simple question, and someone might answer, "Well, this is rules as written, but here's how I do it." And you'll get 20 different answers on how people do it, and other than not being rules as written, right? If you're asking, if you're just saying, "How does this work?" None of those answers are necessarily the wrong way to do things. It's just not necessarily rules as written, and that's fine.
All right. Stefan, we got to get to Bob's specific questions. So do you want to hit him with number one?
Sure thing. Yeah. How is the availability of Invoke Patron related to Patron Bond, or the result of Patron Bond?
And I know we might know these, Bob, but if somebody's new to the game and they're like,
no, I understand. So that is literally when you cast Patron Bond, your spell result in the result tells you how often you can cast Invoke Patron. I think at the lowest result you can cast Invoke Patron once per week, for example. And so that sets that, and that also by default then, if you end up gaining access to a patron spell down the line, that spell when cast replaces a usage of Invoke Patron. So that also limits how often you can cast those patron spells.
Yeah. And that kind of oddness is because oftentimes these patron spells are a wee bit more powerful. They got a little bit more juice to them, and it's for a reason.
Fantastic, yeah.
And this question gets asked a lot because people want to know where they get the patron spells, if they can cast them in place of. It's often a point of contention. But Elena, if you could bring up some facts for us, handout 1B. On page 147, it says the caster commits themselves to the service of a supernatural lord, forming a pact to gain their support as their patron as long as they continue to please it with their service. So that's our one sentence in the definition of patron bond. There is more, but if we could bring up handout 1A for our invoke patron definition. And in order to learn the spell, the caster must first cast Patron Bond. The particulars of the spell vary accordingly to the terms of the patron. In casting the spell, the wizard invokes the name of the supernatural patron and requests aid. And the last handout I'll get to before we bring up this discussion once again is handout 1C. Once the pact is made, the caster may invoke the patron's support with the spell Invoke Patron. It may or may not answer as it sees fit. In return for the patron's assistance, it may ask the caster to do certain things. Reading that, Bob, is that the spell result that we roll? Or could the patron just say, hey, you rolled the 19, but I don't want to deal with you today?
Rules is written when you roll Invoke Patron, right? There's a table, and that is the, I would say, the most common response from the patron. However, I would also say that if you've used Invoke Patron 4 times already and you've built up a huge debt and you've done nothing to alleviate that debt, then your patron's just going to say no, right? I mean, if you already owe me $80, why am I going to let you take it to 100 when you haven't done anything to give me even 5 back yet, right? So I think the Invoke Patron results for each patron are a great guideline, but I think patrons are one of those areas where judges really need to lean into their creativity. Because, I might roll just a 15 on my Invoke Patron, but I'm doing something that is incredibly important to my patron. Well, then the patron might give me a better result because he wants me to succeed. So that's a place where I think judges should play around a bit, but rules as written, there's a spell result.
Stefan and Elena, if you could bring up handout 1D on page 149, the minimum result for Patron Bond is the caster makes contact with the patron, successfully negotiates the compact. They learn Invoke Patron, but they can only cast it once a week, just like Bob said. Each time they cast it, they are indebted to the patron who will call in that debt at some point. So again, just like Bob said, $20 here, $20 here, $20 here. Bro, now you're at 80. Stefan, is that how you play it as well?
Yeah, that's basically how I play it, and it doesn't matter if it's $20 or I'm tired of. I don't want to give my toddler a 5th bottle of juice today. Drink. You
never
gotta
even give me gas.
do something. Yeah, yeah. You just get tired of that question. No, help yourself, or don't. Just stop. Leave me alone for a little bit. You're gonna have that for a while. But yeah, judges really need to let their own skills shine here. The book is not going to have the answers at this point. You got to do it yourself.
Let's go up to handout 1F, Alina, if we could, please. The top result, page 151, 32 plus. The patron considers the caster integral to long-term goals. They learn the spell Invoke Patron as it relates to the patron and can cast it 4 times a day at +2. And this is the part where I kind of wanted to put this result in here. The patron also gives the caster, for which a counter gift is expected, 2 patron spells that they can pick from the patron spell list. The patron spell list is usually a 1st level, a 3rd level, and a 5th level. If I'm 2nd level, do I get to pick any of those 3 spells?
Well, I would say I see what you're getting at, but I would say yes, you can. Now, as a judge, you could handle that one of 2 ways. Okay, well, you've got this 3rd level spell, so once you can cast 3rd level spells, you can cast it. You can certainly do it that way. But also keep in mind that that's being cast in place of Invoke Patron, right? So you are literally invoking the power of your patron to cast this spell, and you always incur a debt when casting a patron spell. So seeing as some of the Invoke Patron results can get quite insane on their own, you could also just let them use the patron spell, whichever they choose.
Yeah, and to whom
That's
much is given,
call.
much will be required.
I don't think.
Right.
I mean, normally if you can't cast a 3rd level spell, you can't cast a 3rd level spell. But patron spells are weird, and they tell you that, and they don't really give you an answer on that. So if you want to err to the side of caution, no. But if you want to go rule of cool, sure.
Especially because they have their own type of Spellburn, Elena.
They do. They have their own tables.
All right.
Because once you've got a patron.
Take it from the patron spell list. Uh-oh, did we lose somebody? I don't know what that was.
No, you froze up for a
second. The caster can cast each of these spells once per day in place of casting Invoke Patron. That's an important thing to note right there, Bob, is that it's cast in place of Invoke Patron. So if I can cast Invoke Patron 4 times, if I cast the patron spell, I've only got 3 chances left, right?
And if you've got that lowest result and it's once per week, you're kind of out of luck.
That's what you got. All right. Another hour's like blown by. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it has. We're going to have to save the other 2 questions for when you come back next time, Bob. But a side question, real quick, Elena, if you could bring up handout 1X. On page 144, it shows us our results. 1 is lost, failure, and worse. 2 through 11 is failure for the Invoke Patron. Bob, it says we can't lose Invoke Patron. May not be lost. Go back to rule 1. Should that say lost and worse? Or is a 1 failure as well? Or should it just say failure and worse? Take out loss because we can't lose.
I would say it should say failure and worse. I think that was probably just sort of somebody working from a template, right? Because you can't lose the spell, because while it's a spell and it's not, right? I mean, technically speaking, Patron Bond is a spell, and Invoke Patron is specific to each patron, right? So when you've got that going, I'm calling upon Ariak, God of Chaos, he could hear me. Whether or not what he's going to do is different. So you can't lose it. So yeah, I would say that should not.
All right. Well, Stefan, we've reached the end of our time. We do have to get going. Stefan, I think something just started today for you. Is that right?
Yeah, I started up a Kickstarter. If folks like Weird Frontiers or Weird Heroes of Public Access, you got to check it out. So, Weird Frontiers, of course, DCC in the Wild West, basically, and I got Big Trouble for a Little Blood. So, if you like a certain John Carpenter movie that has a similar title, go check that out for sure. And for Weird Heroes of Public Access, if you like Joey Royale's whole vibe, you can come and dig this. I got a great little zine there too. And I'm going to be on the pizza party next week, so it's going to be a fun time.
Really? All right.
Yeah.
Preview right here. You heard it first. Stefan is going to be a guest on the next pizza party. I'm looking forward to that. Bob, what do you got going on?
Well, a couple things. Sanctum Media just dropped our 8th release from Ugandan author Ashraf Braden, which is Musoke, which is a patron for DCC. And I have a Patreon now. I'm translating a 19th century French book of demonology into English and providing gameable material for the entire thing. So done, I think we're 50 entries in so far. There's over 30 pages of content for the regular levels. All paying levels get something every month. If you're paying $1, you're still getting content every month because come on, you're going to give me some money. You should get something back, right? So yeah, I'm having fun with that.
Are you translating that from Latin, Bob?
No, I'm translating it from French.
Say something in French for us.
No.
No?
Yeah, you have to pay for that. That's what the Patreon's for.
Oh. My French accent is horrendous, but yeah. So no, it's a lot of fun. What are you doing?
Translating this book of demonology. Have you noticed any hauntings or any objects moving around the house?
No, but it's also right. This is 19th century demonology, so they're also discussing things like Adam, the first human, and powerful figures in Christianity. One of the things that we in last month's release, there's a full character class, the apostate, for clerics that have essentially defied and left their faith as heretics. They're not a warrior, right? So what happens to them? Got a character class for that, and that is one of cool 13 entries for the month.
All right. Well, before I forget, because I always forget, Elena, thank you for being our awesome Twitch mistress and all the things and handouts you do. And thank you for being on my team, Elena, for the Spellburn. I know you agree with me. Is that right, Elena? See? There we go. There we go.
Most dubious.
Bob, thank you for coming on. It was outstanding having you on as a guest again. We hope to see you in 2 months' time, 4 episodes. Will you come back?
Sure. If I don't come back, I could lose my best friend of the show status.
That's true. That is true. Well, I've got a message out to Harley. We're going to see if he can get in here in June or July. We've got some other great guests coming up, people you haven't seen, maybe a couple return members. Our next show is going to be May 14th, and we'll see you then.